want to look at how to do data visualization, right? That's our second stage of the exploratory data analysis. So with data visualization, we are basically looking at graphical presentation of our data set, okay? So we'll be looking at the data visualization for quantitative variables as well as data visualization for the categorical variable, okay? So to start with, let's look at how do we start with some of the graphs for quantitative variables. How do we do that? So let's use the graphs on the menu of our window editor. We are still making use of our original data set. So let's click on this and scroll to legacy dialog. You can also make use of the chart builder, but in this tutorial, I think this is quite easier to use, which is the legacy dialog. So let's come to this, and we are going to make use of histogram. This is one of the important graphs for quantitative variables. So let's click on that. Alright, so what variable are we interested in? Let's start with sepal length. So let me drop it inside this box. Right, we can also give a title to this. So let's give it some title. Let's say histogram plot of sepal length. Sepal length. Yep. So let's click on continue. Okay. Then we can also display the normal curve if we want to, but we are going to skip this for now and click on continue to proceed. Okay. Alright, so in our output window, let's see the result is still running. Okay. Once it's done compiling, we are going to see the output in this window. Okay. So still processing. Okay, so I think it's done. So here we go. This is the graph for the sepal length, histogram plot for the sepal length. So you can see in here, draw back. You can double click on this to basically edit this if you want to. So once I double click this, I can double click again on this, which I can change the background color if I want to. So let me use this color, apply. Okay. You can also make use of this if you want to basically change some of the options. So let's continue, apply. Okay. So we see the effect. I can also double click on the bars to change the color of it. So let's say I want light green, apply. Okay. So this is basically how to edit this graph. Double click on the graph and do that. So I'm going to close this and close this. So this is a histogram plot of the sepal length, and we can see that it is somehow seems to be approximately normal, right? Now we can also get a histogram plot of the sepal length across the levels of the species plant. How do we do that? Let's go back to our recent dialog. Click on histogram. Right, so now in here we are going to include the display normal curve. Then we are going to drop the species on the row panel. So let's drop that. Okay, so let's click on continue to proceed. Okay, so here we go. So this gives us a histogram plot of the sepal length across the levels of the species, and we can see that for that of Setosa, it's approximately normal. For that of vesicalitis, somehow skewed to the right. For Virginica looks typical of that of um, platyceltic, right? You can see that the TSOD distribution is flat and broadened out. Okay, so you can double click on this if you want to edit, right? So let me close this, and I think we are good to go. So this is one of the important plot or important graph for category for continuous or numerical variables, right? That's the histogram plot. The next graph, which is very useful for quantitative variables, is the box plot, right? The box plot is basically a chart which shows data from a 5-number summary point of view. So how do we get our box plot? Let's quickly use that of the graphs again on the menu of our window editor, right? And scroll to legacy dialogs. Scroll down, you see a box plot. Click on that. So let's use a simple, right? And let's use this option, summaries of separate variables, and define. So let's click on this. Alright, so which variable are we interested in? Let's use sepal length and drop it inside this box. Okay, so we can have some options. I think we don't need this. Let's ignore this. And let's click on OK to proceed. Right, so I want to get a box plot of the sepal length variable. Okay, so OK. So let's scroll down. So this gives us the box plot of the sepal length. So this basically, as I've already explained, is a graph which shows data from a 5-number summary point of view. This is the minimum value, which is around 4.2 or 3. This side gives us the first quartile or the 25th percentile. This portion gives us the median value or the 50th percentile, right? And this portion gives us the third quartile, the 75th percentile, and this is giving us the maximum value. Okay, so we can double click on this to also edit if you want to, right? So once you double click again, you can give a background color, right? Let's use this apply and double click on this to basically change the background color, the color of the box. Let me use this. Okay, apply. Okay, let me close. Let's close this so we see the effect. We can also get the box plot of the sepal length across the levels of the species. So let's use the recent dialog. Click on define simple box plot. Right, so now I'm going to include the species. Let me drop this inside a column panel. Scroll down and click on OK to proceed. So let's scroll down. So this gives us a box plot of the sepal length across the levels of the species, right? Now for just the box plot of the sepal length, we saw that there was no missing values, but now, we saw that there was no extreme values, right? But now we can see some extreme values for the Virginica species, right? You can see now when it comes to extreme values, you have to be very careful. Not all extreme values are outliers. An outlier is any observation that is not consistent with the rest of the data values. So you have to be very careful when you are dealing with outliers or extreme values. Okay. In here, the fact that we have extreme values does not necessarily mean that they are outliers. Let me use this. I've already illustrated this in our previous tutorials. For instance, these are the scores of some students in a particular class. The center of this value or this data set is basically around 60 to 70. Okay, assuming someone gets 123 as a score, this is going to be an extreme value, and this will be considered as an outlier because this value is not consistent with the rest of the data values. This is supposed to be percentage out of 100. So if someone is scoring 123, then this is something that has to be deleted because it's supposed to be out of 100. So 123 is above 100, which is an extreme value and will be considered as an outlier. Now assuming someone gets a score of, let's say, 3. This is also an extreme value, right? And this time it cannot be considered as an outlier because it's still within 100%. 3% is still within 100%. So you can't say that this, even though this is an extreme value, you can't say that it is an outlier. So if you try to delete this, you may end up losing some vital information from your sample. Okay, so you have to be very careful when you're dealing with outliers. So let's go back to our output window. So we can see that when we did that for the sepal length for the variable as a whole, we didn't see any extreme values. But when we try to segregate it, try to consider the sepal length across the levels of the species, we see some extreme values, which is being classified as an outlier. But you have to be very careful when you are trying to analyze this data. Okay, before you omit these values, you have to examine the data very well. Take a critical look at it. So we are going to maintain this. So you can double click on this if you want to basically edit this graph. Okay. Let's see, another important graph for quantitative variable that we want to look at is the scatter plot or the scatter diagram. Sometimes we want to look at the relationship between our quantitative variables, so the scatter diagram becomes very useful. How do we get that? Let's scroll to graphs on the menu of our window editor. Right, let's use the legacy dialogs, scroll to scatter, click on that. Okay, so I'm interested in scatter, simple scatter for now. Let's define. So I'm interested in, let's say, sepal length. So let me pull it inside the y-axis. And let's say petal length. Right, let me pull it inside the x-axis. Okay, so I can give a title to this. Right, so let's say this is scatter plot, or let's say scatter diagram of sepal length and petal length. Okay, so let's click on continue to proceed. Okay, so I think we are good to go now. Let's click on OK to proceed. So I'll click on OK. Let's see what comes. So there's the output, and we can see that there seems to be some positive correlation between these two variables. Right, let's double click on this to basically edit our graph. Okay, so let me double click again. So I want to give a background color of, let's say, light green. Apply. Okay, and let me double click on the point. I want to give it a color of, let's say, yellow this time. Okay, apply. This doesn't look nice. Let's give it red. Okay, think it's okay. So let me close this. Alright, let me close this. So you can basically choose any color of your choice. Now, we can also look at the scatter diagram of these two variables across the levels of the species. So let's go back to recent dialog. Let's go to simple scatter. So now I'm going to add the species variable to, let me pull it inside a row panel. Right, so let's scroll down to OK to proceed. Okay, so here we go. So if you scroll down, you can see this gives us the scatter diagram of these two variables across the levels of the species, and we can see that there seems to be a positive correlation between these two variables for the Virginica species. However, there's no correlation between these two variables for the Setosa species. And also there seems to be a positive correlation between these two variables for the Versicolor species. So this is basically how to do this. Okay. Now let's look at how do we get a relationship. How do we get the relationship between these two variables for all the, let's look at how do we get the relationship for the four variables instead of these two variables. Okay, so let's go back to graphs. Okay, so let's click on this and drop to legacy dialogs, come to histogram, sorry, say histogram, scatter. So now we are interested in scatter matrix, which will give us the scatter diagram for all the 4 quantitative variables. So let's click on this and define. So let's get a matrix variables. We are interested in our 4 continuous or numeric variables. So I'm going to highlight on this and drop it inside this box. Okay, so we can give a title to this. This is going to be a scatter matrix diagram of our scale, or let's say of our numeric, or yeah, of our numeric variables. Think of our numeric or continuous variables. So let's click on OK. Sorry, continue first. Then we can click on OK to proceed. So now we see a scatter diagram, right, or a scatter matrix diagram of our numeric variables. So you can see there seems to be a positive correlation between, in fact, a strong positive correlation between petal length and petal width. Okay, and as we have already seen, there seems to be a positive correlation between petal length and petal width. We can edit this. Double click to basically edit. Okay, double click. So let's see. Let's give it a diagram. Background. Let me use this. Apply. Okay. Then let me click on the point. I want to give it which color will be favorable. Let me use this. See, apply. Okay, so close. Let me close this. So this basically gives us a scatter matrix diagram of our numeric variables. So this is not just you're not just looking at a relationship between 2 variables, but you're looking at a relationship for all the 4 continuous variables. Okay, so I think we are good to go. Now these are the most important graphs for quantitative variables. Okay, now let's jump to that of the categorical variables. How do we get some graphs for categorical variables? We are going to basically concentrate on the bar graph and the pie chart. These are the 2 most let's say frequently used graphs for categorical variables. So we are just going to look at that. So let's go back to graphs on the menu of our window editor and click on it. Let's go back to, let's see, legacy dialogs and choose bar. Okay, so we want a simple bar. Let's leave everything as default and click on define. Okay, so in here, what do we want to do? We want the species, which are categorical variable. Let's drop it inside this category as, and let's click on OK to proceed. Okay, okay, so let's pull down. Okay, so this gives us the bar graph for a categorical variable. We can edit this. All right, let me double click again to let me give this okay, light green, apply, and let me double click this and let's give this color. Okay, so you can change the color if you wish to. So this basically how to get the graph for some categorical variable, which is a bar graph. Okay, now one thing, we can now move to that of the pie chart or the pie graph. So we can still go back to graphs on the menu of our window editor, click on it, choose legacy dialogs, and we can see pie graph. Click on that. Let's scroll down. So leave the first option and click on define. So let's choose a species and drop it inside this box. Okay, and then you can give a title if you wish to. Right, so let's say there's going to be a pie chart, right, of species. So let's continue and click on OK to proceed. So let me click on OK. So here we go. So this gives us a pie graph or a pie chart of the species plant, and we can see Setosa has been colored in this color, which is blue. Green is for that of versicolor, and Virginica is in this color. Right. So I think we are good to go. Yep, yep, yep. So this is basically how to do some data visualization in SPSS for exploratory analysis. Right. I think we are good to go. So please, if you find value in this video, don't forget to subscribe if you have not, and also click on the notification bell to get more updates anytime I post on this channel. Thank you for watching.